Hi. In the next part of this lecture, we're going to continue discussing about the comparison of the education system of the Philippines. So you're going to see that the different colonizers in the past influence highly the education system of my country. So let's see our objective. It is for you to gain knowledge on the pros and cons of the Philippine education system during the different colonization periods in my country. So probably you can gain insight on what happened and how come we have this kind of education system these days in the Philippines. Okay. Now, first, the Philippine education. As you already know, most of the Filipinos speak English. So, among the three colonizers here in my country, the Americans actually dominate. So, usually, as you know, the medium of instruction here in the Philippines is English, which is actually kind of like a prototype of the American system. And in the Philippines, our education system is actually categorized into two things. We have the public, which is under the government, and of course, private, which is non government. Okay, so in the next graphs, the table that I'm going to show you, you can see the comparison that we had and the different periods and the various benefits and drawbacks that we had in these periods. So let's start from the early Filipinos. The early Filipinos from 1900 until 1591, as I have discussed in the first part of our lecture, some of the benefits, just as a review, okay, of our education system during the time was to preserve the cultural heritage of our country, which is particularly Babaylan and Catalonan, which were actually highly respected during that time. However, the disadvantage was that during the time they were not that open, okay, when it comes to innovation or development or changes with regards to the various methods of teaching. Now, during the Spanish regime or the Spanish period, some of the benefits of this time was the founding of a complete system of education in the Philippines, composing from the three main levels, which is elementary, secondary, and the college levels. However, some of the drawbacks or cons of this regime was that the priority of education was usually on the Spanish elites or the rich people. And during the time, it actually took time for girls to have an education. And I can see actually that during this Spanish period, there were actually kind of like inequalities in wealth, income, power, and prestige, and opportunities in society at large, which was the reason why girls cannot enter that much during the time at schools, and during the time only actually the rich people can go to schools. Now, as I have told you in the first part of our lecture, one of the things which we were highly influenced by the Spaniards was actually when it comes to religion. Now, under the Spanish education, Christianity is actually a part of the education system, and it was actually largely provided by the missionaries. So the study of religion during the time was compulsory. However, not most, of course, of the Filipinos were included. Okay. Now, during the American regime or the American period from 1899 onwards, some of the benefits actually of this period is, of course, the English language, which was actually used as the medium of instruction. Um, as I have told you in our former lecture, we actually have two official languages in teaching the students or the learners, which are English and Filipino. So the reason is that we were actually highly influenced by the American colonizers. Now, other benefits of the American regime were the different subjects which were introduced, such as reading, writing, arithmetic, history, Philippine history, and other new subjects. And of course, the students were given free school materials, which actually was a good thing because it made it easier for the students to learn during the time. However, of course, if there are some benefits, there are also some drawbacks. So, what are these? Of course, the usage of our own language was kind of like oppressed. So, it was actually barely used in teaching and in the learning process. But you can understand why, because during that time, the teachers were all or mostly Americans. Therefore, usually, of course, they use the English language in teaching. As a result, the Filipino language was barely used. And another thing, the education system during the time, since most of the most of the teachers are Americans, the system was actually designed for American students. Therefore, some of the part of their curriculum was not suitable for the Filipino students. Okay. Now, during the American period, schools were provided by the state, and no state intends to establish schools which subvert its purpose, values, and ideas. Okay, in addition to that, some of the pros again of the American regime is that most of the students who are actually good or intelligent were actually sent to the US, okay, to continue their studies and to become experts in their desired fields or profession. And during the time, the good thing was places in some remote areas were, of course, not left behind, and they were actually given particular attention, more specifically in teaching them some vocational skills. Okay, so you can see that from the pre-Spanish period, Spanish and the American period, these colonizers made us learn something from them. But at the same time, there are also some drawbacks in these situations or in these periods. Now let's see. How about during the Japanese regime? What were the benefits that we had during this time? So the benefits actually is during this time, the education aimed to foster a new Filipino culture based on the self-consciousness of the people as Orientals, because they believe that since we are in the Orient, just like Japanese, our culture must be particularly quite similar with them. Okay. However, one of the drawbacks, again, just like the other colonizers, Nippongo served as another oppressing language for the Filipinos. So they want us to learn the Nippongo language, and which is the reason why the Filipino language during the time was not used that much. Luckily, we were only colonized for only a few years. How much more if we were colonized for a longer period of time? Okay, now at the present, let's see some of the benefits of our period these days. Since one of the goals of UNICEF actually is to have an education for all or education for everyone, this one actually became a good thing because anyone, regardless of gender and class in the society, they can have the opportunity to enter the schools. And of course, it is usually for free. In the public schools or government or state-owned schools. Usually they only pay some miscellaneous fees, but everything is actually for free. Okay. However, of course, there are some drawbacks of our present education system, which is the lack of school facilities, lack of well-trained teachers, of course, low teacher salaries, but these days it increased compared with the past. Teacher salary these days is still far better than before. And private tuition fees are increasing year on year. So it means the private schools, every year their tuition fee increases since they are actually not subsidized or helped by the government. Okay. And one thing also that I would like you to remember, our system these days actually has been shaped by the Philippines' colonial and post-war history. So you can see that the changes are actually quite big and quite small, but whatever the differences is, this was actually the result of the colonial influences by these colonizers or conquerors that we had in the past. Okay, so as you can see here, now in my country, despite some predicaments, qualitative improvements and achievements in the Philippine education system are still notable in, of course, number of areas. Even if we had some insufficiency or lack of something in some parts in our education system, still we can say that there is a slight increase in the number of higher education faculty holding higher degrees. It means that there are more number of teachers or faculty having master's degree or doctorate degree compared with some teachers that we had in the past. Also, one thing that we are proud of, or let us say, we can say that there is a change in our education system, is that the number of higher education institutes with accredited education programs increased by more than 40%. So it means that the accreditation actually shows how good the school is when it comes to handling their learners and, of course, preparing their curriculum. Okay. And one thing more, even if we had, of course, many insufficiency, one thing also that we are proud of is that the passing rates of candidates when it comes to having their professional licensing exams increased, of course, from 33.9% to 58.6%. So that's actually a big number. So it means that the number of professionals increases as time goes by. Okay, and it is also great to know that Filipinos are generally prioritizing higher and advanced education these days because we believe that with our advanced education and or higher education, it could actually help us more to become more professionals. Therefore, it will actually be more helpful for the country. Okay. Now, with the efforts of the local government, okay, as you can see here in our slide, the advancements of local educational institutions and other social responsibility corporations and the individual pursuits of Filipinos for personal empowerment through education, of course, a rise in the number of innovators, researchers, and knowledge producers in the country may not be, of course, a big problem in the future. Since we have actually more professionals who are having their advanced classes or who are actually trying to advance their education these days compared with before. Okay, so what I would like to show you next is just a very quick information about how our education system looks like. In the next lecture that I'm going to talk about, I'm going to discuss in detail on how our education system looks like in the past and at present. So this is the flow chart of our current Philippine education system. So you can see from primary school, and then we will go to junior to high school, senior high school, and what you can see here on top are actually the undergraduate, or we call that one as the bachelor's degree. Okay. Now, it's actually also we call that one as the 4-year courses where the students go to the university. And then after that, it's the choice, of course, of the person if he or she is going to advance his studies by means of going to postgraduate schools. Okay, it means taking their master's degree or their doctorate degree. So this is just a quick information on the flow of the education system here in the Philippines. Now you can see it keeps actually on changing. To sum up what we have discussed for today, for this lecture, okay, today's system actually has been shaped, of course, by the Philippine colonial post-war history. So whatever we have in our curriculum these days was actually quite influenced by our colonizers in the past, which are the the Spaniards, Americans, and the Japanese. Most specifically, the Americans. Okay. Now, it was only in the 19th century that they were able to attend the universities that had been established 2 centuries earlier. So we actually didn't have university that much during the Spanish era. It actually mostly started when the Americans actually came here or took control of the Philippines from 1898 onwards. Okay, so that consideration was actually given to non religious education, English language teaching, and free primary school education for all. So I hope you learned that in the Philippine education system, it keeps on changing as time goes by. I think this is similar actually to the education of system in your country and other countries. So these changes are actually for the better. And similar with this year, we actually also try to, as we enter actually the digital era, our education system actually keeps on changing still, and we're trying to see to it that it will cater well, of course, to our Filipino learners. And of course, we always see to it that the changes will will be for the betterment, of course, of the learners. Okay, thank you very much. That's the end of this lecture.